At this point, we have fully set up our recycler view to display these items. It's displaying these three: buy groceries, do laundry, and play guitar. But it's not displaying whether or not they are urgent, okay? And that's just because we're passing in the string names. We could also pass in some Boolean values, but wouldn't it be easier if we could just pass in an entire object that contains all of the information that we need? So that's what we'll work on in this section, just kind of creating our custom to-do object. We'll update the list to take the object fields and data into account and display those, and then we can finish off with a quick summary of what we've covered so far. So in order to create a new class, what we'll want to do is select that same package again. We might as well stick everything in the same package. We're going to create a new Kotlin file/class. Let's make sure a class is selected. And I'm just going to call mine to-do item because, that's exactly what it is. Okay, so no need for a subclass or superclass or anything. So rather than implement it together, what I would like to do is have you guys try to implement your own version of this. Keep in mind, it probably will at least need a name. And in my case, it needs an urgency as well. I'm not sure what other kind of data you'll have, but make sure that you have fields for each of those items. You'll probably want 1 or 2 constructors. And in my case, I might have some additional info to retrieve items or to modify them or even to get stuff like the date. So if you're interested in associating or attaching a date with a to-do item, then I would suggest looking into the calendar class. Okay, that has that contains just about all the information you'd need for that. Otherwise, try it yourself, and I'll show you my solution in just a few seconds. Alright, so this is the implementation I've come up with. It's very simple, just has a few fields to keep track of. So it has the name, which we're setting in the primary constructor, and we're defaulting is urgent to false. So if the user chooses just to enter a name and not whether or not it's urgent, we'll just default that to be false here. I'll explain what date is in just a second. I have a second constructor which takes in the name and whether or not the item is urgent, just in case we want to explicitly state yes it's urgent or no it's not urgent. It's then calling on the super constructor with the name, or rather the primary constructor with this particular name, and then it's setting is urgent to whether or not we pass true or false. That's just a Boolean value, by the way. It seems to make sense that way. As for date, this is just getting an instance of calendar, so it sets this as soon as the item is created, as soon as a new instance of to-do item is created, and then we can get the date formatted in the correct format, well, the format that I would like. So in my case, it would return something that looks a little like this. Let's say we want to get today's date, 2018/03/20, and this is kind of how the date is going to be stored. So you actually don't need to keep track of the date right now. If you didn't include it, that is totally fine. We're only going to use the date in the very last section. So it's good to know how to do this anyway, because you might find yourself building apps at which point you might need to access the calendar fields and methods. So it's definitely worth checking out and definitely worth knowing how to do. So I'm assuming that you have an implementation of to-do item ready to go. At the very least, it has a name. So let's move forwards. The next step, and the final step really, is going to be to, instead of having a list of strings, have a list of to-do item objects. This way we can pass them into our adapter. We'll of course have to modify that because this is expecting a list of strings, and then we'll display the correct data in the correct fields here. So back to main activity, and rather than adding a bunch of just strings to our array list, we're going to change this to an array list of objects, or of to-do item type specifically, and then we're just going to create a bunch of to-do item objects. So let's just first create a new to-do item. We'll pass this one a name, and this one was, I think, buy groceries. For the name, we'll actually set is urgent to false. I'm not going to bother filling in a field there. I'm going to set do laundry, so we might as well keep the same names. Let's see, this was do laundry. I'm actually going to set this equal to true because I do want to say that this is urgent, and then just for the sake of variety, I'm going to set play guitar equal to not urgent explicitly, so this is play guitar, and we're going to set is urgent equal to false. Okay, just to again show a bit of variety there. So now the error is coming up that to-do items, our adapter here is expecting a to-do items list that is an array of strings, but we're passing in a bunch of items. So we'll have to go to the adapter class itself and modify this array list of strings to display an array list of to-do items. Now, we get the error down here saying that, well, we're trying to set our text view's text equal to an entire object. That doesn't really work because in the best case scenario, that would give us the address of the object, which still won't mean anything to us. We want the name specifically to go in our name text view. So lucky for us, we can simply call upon name, and that solves the issue right away. Now there was one more piece of data I wanted to display, and that was whether or not the item is urgent. I'm not going to bother displaying the date for now. So what I'll want to do is actually get my second text field, or text view rather, seeing as I only have the one. I want to get the urgency of the object, so true or false, and then I want to display some appropriate string. In my case, I might do something like 2 exclamation marks if it's urgent, and then perhaps nothing at all if it's not urgent. Okay? So let's first get that second text view. In my case, it is the second item here, so I can get the child at index 1. And of course, I'll need to name this something different. I'll go with something like urgency text view. And then I'm just going to set its text. So something along the lines of urgency text view is equal to the test to see if the item is in fact urgent. So is the to-do item at this position, is this particular to-do item urgent? Okay. If it is, we want to set this to the 2 exclamation marks. Otherwise, we'll set this just to a blank string, okay? And, oh, right, should probably set the text rather than the text view itself. So there we go. And this is just saying, okay, if this is urgent, so it's urgent equal to true, we'll set the text equal to this. If this is equal to false, then we'll set it equal to this. And this is one of the more amazing things I personally like about Kotlin, is the fact that we can turn if statements into if expressions. It's really cool, and it just saves a little bit of time and confusion there. Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to give this another test through. In fact, I'm actually going to delete that and delete that. And I think we had one more custom class. So let's go ahead and give this a run through, make sure that emulator is still running. I think the other one was here. No, actually deleted that already. So if this works well, then it should display my item, and next to it, it should display 2 exclamation marks if it's urgent, or just nothing if it's not urgent, okay? Which will be a bit of a leg up from what we had before. So it looks like it's working fine. Not urgent, is urgent, and not urgent, so we're doing pretty well so far. Now, note that selecting the items actually still does nothing for these. Well, in order to actually have something happen, we would have to implement what's called an on-click listener for these items. However, that can take a little bit of time, because what I'd essentially want to do is click on the item and navigate to our add item activity page where we could then edit the item. However, for that we're going to need to learn a little bit about intents and how to pass values into an intent. So far we learned a little bit about intents, but not necessarily how to put values into intents, and then how to retrieve values from them, as we would have to at the very least pass the item name onto the next page. If you do want to do some reading ahead to try and figure out how to do that, I would really strongly encourage you to do so, but it can be a little confusing, so no worries if you don't necessarily want to do that right away. Otherwise, that just about concludes day 2. So I'm going to do a quick little summary in the very next section. It'll just take a few minutes in which I'll kind of go over everything that we've covered today. If you are comfortable with everything so far, you don't need the summary, that's totally cool. You can skip the next section and feel free to even start the next day's stuff early if you want. Or if you want to learn a little bit about how to pass values into intent, then look into the functionality of intent.putExtra. And then on the receiving screen, you'll want intent.getExtra. Okay, so get string extra, get boolean extra, int extra, etc. Okay, so if you want to do some kind of exploration for yourself, then I'd recommend trying out those methods. Otherwise, I'll kind of go over them and maybe explain them in a little greater detail at the end of the very next section, which is just going to be the summary.